Welcome to another virtual Live Talks Los Angeles event. We welcome David Baldacci to our screen to talk about the writing life and his new book, Walk the Wire. Baldacci is a best-selling author whose books have been published in over 45 languages in more than 80 countries, with 150 million copies sold worldwide. Interviewing him is Gregg Hurwitz, best-selling thriller writer, including the Orphan X series. His novels have been published in 32 languages. He's also written screenplays and television scripts for many of the major studios and networks, comics for DC and Marvel, and political and culture pieces for the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, and others. David's new book is Walk the Wire and is available wherever books are sold, and we encourage you to support the authors we feature and independent bookstores by buying their books at bookshop.org. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. So even more impressive, I think, than David's 41 novels in 45 languages and 150 million copies sold is the fact that when I think of David Baldacci, I think of one-time Pinkerton security guard. Early job position. You worked your way through college, is that right?
I did, yes. That was one of the jobs I had. And it was interesting. Pinkerton makes you sign a waiver, and you can never write about any experience that you have as a Pinkerton security guard, because I went in at 4:00 in the afternoon, and after extensive training by Pinkerton, I was on the job at 8:00 that night. And they only asked me two questions. One, what size uniform do you wear? And two, do you want a gun? And I told them the size of my uniform, and I told them, no, I did not want a gun. And they said, well, you're the only one that's ever refused a gun. Why? And I said, it's $3 an hour. If I've got a gun and they've got a gun, they're much more apt to shoot me, so I don't want a gun.
Yeah, or the bullet will ping around and hit the guy with the most expensive lawyer. So now you wrote ever since you were a kid, right? You had a lined notebook your mom gave you, mostly to keep you quiet because, you know, it's difficult being a mom. Do you remember a specific moment that you had of thinking that this is what you wanted to do? Or was this just always the way your brain worked, that you were thinking in stories? Or was there a moment that the reality of maybe being a novelist first occurred?
Yeah, I started writing short stories because I love reading short stories, and for an aspiring writer, that's kind of a little bit of it's a safe haven, only to the extent that you can finish it relatively soon. It's not a 500-page novel. It could be a 4-page, 5-page, 10-page short story, and you could have a sense of accomplishment when you're first starting out. That's a good thing because it's easy to get frustrated and disgruntled and just want to give it up. But in a short story, you have to bring to bear all the elements of a long-form fiction. You have to have characters and plot and dialogue and descriptions and all that. So it's a great training ground for a longer format novelist. And I guess at the point that I really thought that maybe I could carve a career as a writer is right after I graduated from law school, and I was moving up to Washington, D.C. to practice law. And I had written, a couple of very almost novella-length stories. And I really liked them, and I liked the idea of spending my life putting words together to build stories. And I spent 10 years of my life as a writer taking words and building them into stories. And some of the best fiction I ever wrote was when I was practicing as a lawyer, because all I had in my quiver were words. That was all the arrows I had.
Do you remember as a kid thinking in stories, or did that come later?
All the time, because back then, obviously, I come from a generation, there was no such thing as Game Boys or Xbox or whatever. So we were always sent out to create our own worlds to play in. And I had a pretty vivid imagination. So I was the kid who always set up the scenarios,
right?
Whether we were, at war, whether we were spies, whether we were adventurers going through the woods on our mini bikes and what we were going to explore and find out who we were going to rescue and all that. And I would set all those scenarios up and kind of build the stories for everybody else. And when I was in middle school and high school, I was in school plays, and I loved that because I memorized not only my lines, but everybody else's lines, so I could have sort of control over the whole production. So if somebody else screwed up, I could help them.
Yeah.
But I like having control over the story flow. So that was really my whole life. So during the summers, we'd leave the house at 7 in the morning, and we'd come back for dinner at 6 o'clock that night. And all that time, we were out there just living in a fantasy world.
There's a wonderful book by Michael Chabon called Manhood for Amateurs, which is also one of my favorite titles. And he talks about that boredom, running around in your bike, in the suburbs of Pittsburgh. They'd go off in the woods, and how it gave rise to creativity. There was nothing to do. and they had a sort of internal map of the neighborhood, like where the scary dog was and and it was just, you're off alone with your imagination. And it seems like that was sort of a key element for you. Now, you and I share an abiding love for Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators series.
Yes.
That was my end-all be-all series as a kid. I'm amazed more people don't know them, because everybody knows the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. And that series was spot on. I was obsessed with them. I remember when a new one would come out, like I was, I'd be that's back when we had a bookstore on every corner, but I'd just be eagerly waiting. And I mean, it's funny because is it the characters? Is it the Hitchcock overlay? Like, what do you think about those was so seminal for writers and not as much in the general population?
I liked it because Jupiter Jones, Pete Crenshaw, and Bob Andrews were my age, and they lived in Rocky Beach near Los Angeles. A place was on the other side of the country for me. I knew nothing about it, but I learned a lot about it just from reading those books. They lived by their wits. One was athletic, one was studious, the researcher, and one was just flat out brilliant in Jupiter Jones. So you had the whole diversity of characters there.
That's like a mini Camel Club.
It was a mini Camel Club. The ensemble cast was just perfect. They had this cool trailer headquarters, a super junkyard. And the stories, the plots, as a kid, the plots were really intriguing, and I liked them. And they had twists and turns, and there was danger and action and elements of intrigue and detective work. And they had clues, and they figured stuff out. And they all brought strengths to bear, which is really good storytelling. And I actually went back. I found there's a website online called SethSalvageYard.com that sells first editions of all the Three Investigator books. And I've gone back now, and I bought first editions of all of them, because over the years I lost them. I'd read them so much.
I'm going to have you email me that offline, because I literally wanted to figure that out. I mean, I
will send it to you.
So we'll do that.
It's the real deal. They've got everything there.
Oh, that's great. Everything. That's terrific. So I wanted to ask you were a wrestler in high school, right? And then you started in college. And one of the things that's interesting for me is I feel like so often with writers, people talk about the academic backgrounds. You studied political science, you went to law school, but there's a different value set in sports that isn't talked as much. And it's training, it's discipline, it's focus. And I was wondering how those things translated into your writing routine and perspective, because most people draw back to academics. And I think there's a lot about being an athlete and being a writer that are similar. And I was wondering if that's something you thought about.
I have, So I played two sports in high school. I played football, and that was a fall sport, and I wrestled, and that was a winter sport. I played football at 175 pounds. I wrestled at 145. So within 3 weeks, I had to drop 30 pounds, which was stupid and dumb. But back then, nobody really cared about that. You just did what you had to do. Wrestling is a team sport in name only. It is a individual sport in every important respect. But what it taught you was just two things. One, incredible discipline, not only in your training as the athlete and the moves you have to do and your endurance and all that, but it taught you great discipline on how you respected and treated your body, because it's one of those few sports like boxing where you have to make weight. And if you don't wrestle. So you had to be in control of everything. And I am a little bit of a control freak, just because that really pounded into me that, if you're controlling it and it's a success, great. But you also have to take accountability if it fails. And I was fine with that. I just wanted to make sure that I could control it. And sports for me were just, it set a motor on you. They talk about football players who have this great motor to never stop. That was burned into me from an early age. And as a wrestler, you've got in high school 6 minutes, in college 9 minutes, and your motor can't stop, because if it does, you lose. And I brought that to bear into my writing life, my career as a lawyer, this incredible work ethic. I tell people that if you have a great work ethic and nobody can outwork you, you're going to be a success no matter what you do. Right. But it takes a lot to get there.
Right. So the other thing that I was curious about that seems defining, it's like there's this foundation that it seems that you have built in. And part of that is, and one thing you've talked a lot about, and I think I've seen in your writing the way that it informs your characters and your plots, is you're proudly from a working class background. I mean, you worked your way through college, you rode a motorcycle to school. There's an anecdote you told about how, you had the one parking lot on campus that the guy let you park in a sliver of a space so you could save money. And, one of your professors at VCU recalls you the first time seeing you walk into class at 9 a.m. wearing your security guard uniform. And it seems like there's a lot of those characteristics, hard work, fairness, and justice that inform and kind of bleed through your writing. And I just wanted to ask about that because it seems like it's part of the David Baldacci narrative universe, for lack of a better word.
It's sort of a big part of my ethos, I think, just because it was ingrained to me from a very early age, and it's become a part of my identity. And when you write, unless you're something less than human, it's impossible not to let that integrate and infiltrate into your writing, because it sort of skews your vision of life and people and just society and the fairness or unfairness of society in general. So it did. Yeah, absolutely it does. And it permeates throughout my writing, how I build my characters, what situations I put them into, outcomes that I would like to see. Sometimes they're not always what I want, but if it fits the story, fine. But at least you can, have aspirations for that. And as a kid growing up, I lived on the east side of Richmond, which is the poor side. The west side, like many societies, people move west, and that's where the money goes. So if you were in Richmond and you wanted to go to college in Richmond, if you were rich, you went to the University of Richmond, which is a private school. If you were not rich, you went to VCU, which was back then was sort of a commuter school. I didn't even live on campus. I lived with my family, my parents, through college, because even though VCU was relatively cheap, to live on campus was just too much more than I could afford. So those are sacrifices, but I think at the end of the day, they made you stronger and a little more clever. If you don't have a bunch of money to throw at a problem or an issue, you have to outthink the problem or issue. Right. And that's what I did throughout a lot of my early life.
It's so funny how necessity is the mother of invention. I mean, I have some friends who are in venture capital in Silicon Valley, and they always talk about sometimes getting overfunded is the kiss of death, right? Because you don't have to figure out how to lean out your ethic and process, or the motor, right? You're talking about the motor in football. So there's one anecdote about you that I love, that I came across when I was prying into your past like a Pinkerton detective of my own. And that's, you wrote a senior thesis in college, you got the top score. And this is one of my favorite moments. This is like most likely to become a novelist. You asked your professor if you could rewrite it after the fact to make it even better. And then you went off for 8 months and rewrote your 100-page thesis and submitted a rewrite to it later. And there's a sort of meticulousness and perfectionism in that that really reminds me a lot of writing a novel. I mean, somebody once said being a novelist is like having homework for the rest of your life, right? And it's that thing of wanting to get it right. It's that drive. And how do you balance that kind of perfectionism and with also knowing when you have to let go of something, like when it's good enough, right? Because you could still be rewriting Absolute Power.
Every writer could be rewriting every book they've ever done. I think, it's an obsession. I think writers are obsessed about what they do, and that's not a bad thing. So when I'm writing a novel, I don't outline the whole novel. I don't know the ending before I sit down to write it. I had an online chat with Mike Connolly yesterday about this, and he's sort of the same way. I like the sense of exploration and discovery as I'm writing. But if you don't have an outline, what you have to do is become completely immersed in the story to such a significant degree that it's almost like you're living it. So how does that help me know when I'm going to end the novel and know it's good enough to be sent off? It's because I have accomplished everything in my obsessive, compulsive nature that I knew I wanted to achieve in that novel, because I lived it the whole time I was writing it. I was thinking about it at 9 different levels. I wasn't looking at an outline telling me what I was supposed to write that day. I was living my characters' arcs. I was in the situations physically and emotionally and mentally. And so by the time I get to the end, I've thought about every scenario 9 ways from Sunday and have obsessed over which is the perfect way to put this to bed. And then when I've achieved that, and sometimes it takes me longer than others, depending on the book and the situation, and I know that it's time to sort of let that catapult.
It's so funny you're describing this. I had this realization fairly recently that, there's that endless, do you outline or make it up as you go? I have sort of a fusion in between the two, because I want to feel like the outline in the story is living and breathing all the way through the writing process. And I had this realization, and it reminds me a lot of how you're describing it, where I was thinking that I'm not actually writing a book. What I'm doing is trying to occupy a space through the whole writing of the story that I'm feeling the most alive. And the story is what results with that. And so really weird switch in focus that I wasn't even really aware of, which is less like, what's my page count for the chapters? Where am I in the novel that's in Microsoft Word on my screen? And it's much more about, is the state that I'm in immersed, like the way that you're saying, emotionally and physically? Is your focus there? You know, are you in the story all the way? And if you can carry yourself through that from page 1 to page 400, you know, it seems like the story is almost the result of what the experience is. And you're talking a lot about your experience in a book and how that's how you know it, when you know you're on that cutting edge between chaos and order the whole time.
There has to be chaos, you know, there has to be an element of order, but there has to be an element of chaos of like, I don't know what's coming. And if you write a book as a writer, and I use mini outlines too, because, you know, I'll outline a chapter here or there, or maybe a certain movement like you would do in a musical score, to sort of go at a macro level as opposed to a micro level. So I know there are big accomplishments I want to achieve, and then you fill in the small details of how you're going to get there. But I've always felt that, you know, if you don't have that sense of, you know, surprise, that sense of expectation, that sense of I'm not really sure where we're going to go, that's not a bad thing, because that forces you at a subconscious level to really dig down deeper than you otherwise would have if you had sort of a helpmate over here to tell you what you were supposed to do. And then if you surprise yourself while you're writing a novel, you're going to knock the readers on their ass.
That's
I mean,
right.
that's just the way it is. And I know that and hold that to be sort of true. So I've always tried to approach it that way, in that sense of epiphany. But senses of epiphany are a little bit misleading. It's like, oh my God, I just thought of it. No, you know, it's at a certain level in your brain. You have been thinking about this, you know, obsessively, and it just finally percolated to the surface and popped out and said, voila, there it is for you. And that happens a lot while I'm writing novels. But you do have to have a sense of order. You know, just like you do. I mean, look at your books. You have 100 different subject matters you have to cover, and you have to know about each of these things in great detail. And I love that about your books, because the research is there, but it's distilled down. It's not heavy-handed. But you have to put a battle plan together. You know, what's the location? I got to figure out the location. I got to go there. I got to talk to people. What are the myriad elements that I need to put into this? I need to know about each of them. How am I going to build the characters and integrate them into the story that I put together? So there's a battle plan that you have to be ordered about. But there's also that you know, Bill Goldman, the screenwriter, once told me, like, hanging on by your thumbs, you know, and if you let go, you're going to fall 1,000 feet to your death, is a great way to write a book. You know, because you've got that edge and that chip on your shoulder that gives you a little bit more juice than someone who's sort of just methodically going through the process.
Yeah, and there's a selfish focus on what you're doing. You know, it's a lot. I mean, that's the part that I think is a lot like being an athlete. Like when you're in training, you have to elevate it and make it the most important thing you're doing, because any given day there's 50 things that are more pressing, unless you just decide to make that the most pressing thing. That's a great metaphor with the thumbs. So one thing that's unusual, or that I think differentiates your career from a lot of others, if you look at people who kind of built and then exploded, is you came out with Absolute Power. It launched you to the top, and you basically started at the top of the game, and you've stayed ever since. And I was wondering, what was the moment when you knew that you were there, that this venture that had launched, that you were a huge success? Was it then? Was it only after you did it 3 or 4 times? Is there a particular moment that symbolized the awareness of you saying, got it, I'm now a, you know, top tier crime writing novelist. This is who I am and what I do. Was there a moment in that for you ever that?
I'm there yet. You know, I've never felt that sense of sort of satisfaction or comfort, or having got to, you know, that level, because I think if you feel like you've gotten to that level, then you've just tripped and you're about to take the fall. You know, the thumbs have come loose, and there you go, because then the sort of the edge gets lost. I've always felt like, and Absolute Power was great. I will tell you that the first notion that I had when I thought that maybe I could carve a career as a writer is when back then I just sent the entire manuscript up to like 7 agents, and with a short query letter. And in the query letter, I said, you know, I'm a lawyer in DC. This is a story about the president, the cover up a tryst, the burglar. Eventually the truth comes out and he's impeached by the Congress. And I guarantee you, if you read the first page, you won't stop until you read the last page. Sincerely, me. It was like 1 paragraph. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One, I felt like if I couldn't have confidence in my own material. How could I expect others? And secondly, I knew that most of them would probably read it just to prove me wrong. So they could call me up and say, you know what, you suck.
Another arrogant lawyer.
Yeah, another arrogant lawyer. But when I sent it up to, 7 agents, 6 of them called back within a couple of weeks and said, we'd love to be your agent. That allowed me, after many rejections over the years, and having people tell me that, no, it's not good enough, that was a great sense of satisfaction. Even before I'd sold the book, it was just a little bit of, a pat on the back saying that you worked hard and this is something that people, find okay.
Yeah, it's another overnight success, years in the making. So another thing for you that's been a defining aspect of your career and your focus has been philanthropy. There's a lot of funds for university students. You have the Wish You Well Foundation, Feeding Body and Mind Foundation, Literacy, Poverty, Hunger. I think you've gotten, 1 million books to families and food banks, families in need. Where did that start? And I was wondering, was that something that was the drive? What was the moment that you decided that you were going to start to put your focus in that way? Does it have to do with your own background and knowing how hard you worked and knowing that the ways that people paid you attention and shined a little bit of light on you along the way meant so much to you? What was your kind of connection with that? Because it's been such a huge part of your life.
It is. It was a combination of a lot of different factors. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia in the 60s and 70s, and it was deeply segregated. You still had, whites only sections, black only sections of town. Virginia was the first state to integrate its schools, southern state to integrate its schools. When the Brown v. Board of Education decision came down from the Supreme Court in 1954, the Supreme Court said southern states must integrate their schools with all due speed. Virginia was the first southern state to do it. They began doing it in 1972. That's not even the speed of a glacier. I was the first class in Richmond to integrate. So they sent us to, all these little white kids from, a neighborhood, sent us into the inner city to a school there, and sent a bunch of African-American kids out to our neighborhoods. And it was a fiasco. It was almost like the parents said, we can't figure this crap out, so we'll let the 6-year-olds do it. But I knew, even though growing up in Richmond and, and with limited means, that opportunities for me were still light years ahead of those people of color. And I understand that in society today, our society is vastly unequal in every metric you can measure. And I know that I could have gone in a very different route growing up where I did. A lot of the people that I grew up with have a very different view of the world than I do. And what saved me was books, because I never had a chance to leave Richmond as a kid to go anywhere. We didn't have the means to really travel anywhere, but I saw the world through books. So I saw people who didn't look like me or speak like me, dress like me, pray like me, but we all shared a common humanity.
So it's giving them a
It is, and that's what saved me. But so many other kids growing up don't even have that limited opportunity. So when it came to deciding what philanthropy to do, it was an easy one for us: literacy and books, teaching people to read and putting books in homes. Because I know that having books in my home vastly changed my life, and it can for other people too. And without a strong reading public, we can't have a democracy. These days, you look at all the disinformation campaigns going around and misinformation. So if you can't read lots of different types of in lots of different types of venues, process it, come up with your own opinions, who you want to vote for. There's lots of people, they're headquartered, a lot of them are Washington, D.C., will tell you exactly how you're supposed to vote, exactly what you're supposed to think, exactly what you're supposed to believe, which information sources are great, and which one you should never read.
When you're writing, what is the thing that gives you the most joy? Is it a good line or a good plot twist? Like, what's the thing when you get that makes you want to get up and just take a victory lap?
And you'll know too. It is if you've nailed a sentence to perfection, and it said everything you wanted to say, or if you've built the twist over 300 pages. And I've done this many times. I've spent months and months and months building this path to this twist that I know, and then I write the twist, and it all works. It all holds together. The ship doesn't sink. And then then you get up and you're like, I'm going to go out and do something fun because I earned that one. It's a great, and it's a great feeling.
What is the most embarrassing moment you've had at a book signing?
I was at a book signing, and I gave a talk, like most of us do, and I was signing books. And I was signing books. A gentleman came over and he sat down in a chair across from me while they had a line of people coming in. I'm signing away, and he just kept staring at me. And he looked like he had, had a hard life. He was, dressed in pretty much, one level above rags. He had one arm that had been cut off at the elbow, so it was just a stump. He was long, wiry hair. He just looked like, he had a very challenging life. He's probably in his 70s. And he had a bag that was a bag of stuff held over the stump. And he just sat for like an hour and a half while I'm signing away, just staring at me. And it was a little bit unnerving. I didn't know. And one of the people who worked at the bookstore came over and said, he comes around here from time to time. Don't worry. It's not a problem. I said, fine. So signing away, I finished signing the last book signed. He gets up and comes over to him, and he pulls out from the bag a wallet. It's like one piece of leather here and one piece of leather here and a long rubber band that has like 9,000 pieces of paper in between, the two leather pieces. And he starts pulling out like little notes and, Post-its and pieces of paper. And he proceeded to tell me for the next 30 minutes a story that he was one of twins, and that his brother took the family fortune, had murdered several members of the family in order to get that. He knew where the bodies were buried, and he had come because he wanted me to write the story. He wanted me to write this non-fiction account of the slaughter by his twin, and he wanted his wealth back. And I was, I'm unfailingly polite at events. I never want to put anybody in a bad situation. I abhor trying to, if anybody feels embarrassed about anything, I just never want to do that. So I told him, it sounded like a wonderful story. I said, my God, I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm sure it was horrific. I don't write those types of stories, but if you want to leave us some information, contact information, I can pass it along to people who write those types of stories. And he goes, well, I thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate talking to you. And he said, in gratitude, I've signed this book that I wrote, a book on pottery, Chinese pottery. I wrote this and I wanted to give it to you. So he opened it up and showed me, he had written it out to me with a very nice inscription. And I was like, well, that's very nice. Thank you. And then he left. And so I'm packing up and, getting him stuff. And I put the book he'd given me in my bag. And I walked out the door and all the alarms went off because he had not written that book. He had stolen the book from the bookstore, and then he had signed it to me. And so I had to be explaining to like the Barnes and Noble people that, no, I did not steal this book. Here's an inscription to this guy. And so that was a little weird.
That's pretty great. There's Stephen King wrote, book on writing, which it's terrific. And he dedicated it to Amy Tan because there was a conversation that they had, and Amy said, he said, what's the one thing that no one ever asks you about? And she said, no one ever asks about the writing, right? Because with her, everything was about the themes, right? And the culture. And Stephen King, it's the same thing also. Nobody ever asks about the writing when you're writing stuff that's call it genre, call it cultural writing. People gravitate more to that stuff. Is there a question that you wish you got asked in interviews, or a way that what are the things that you wish that you were able to talk about more, or that people drew out more in your writing that don't tend to be the things people focus on?
People, in particular interviews, they want to look at kind of the nuts and bolts of the numbers. They don't want to talk about how the sausage is made. They don't want to get into that because I think they figure it must be boring. So why even talk about it? And I'll tell you what bugs me when I go to some events, and I know the way that people say it, they probably don't mean anything negative by it, but I hate this phrase. People come up to me a lot at events and say, man, you just keep churning these books out. Wow. And in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, well, you know what? You churn butter because I've churned butter, and that's not how you write a book. I never really get asked a lot about the true nuts and bolts of putting stories together. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But because I would like to talk about it more. I did a master class where I got to talk about it a little bit more than I ordinarily would. Because that's what I sort of find fascinating about it. In writing books, you're creating something that didn't exist before you thought of it. It's not like making a lot of other stuff where you have a blueprint for it, or you just do the same thing over and over again. So when every book is different, separate, it's an original creation, didn't exist before you thought of it. So that means a lot of, work, time, effort, angst, frustration, anxiety has to go into each one. because you're creating a different world each time. And I didn't really get asked about that other than just at a very superficial level. And when you're on TV and you have 3 minutes to talk, it's not like you can get in it anyway. So I wish that people would actually talk more about how do you actually make this sausage. Not saying that in a derogatory way, but when they just ask me, so what's your daily life like? What's your process? And it's just far more than that.
Right. What piece of advice do you wish you could have given yourself at the start of your career?
About things that, not that you know a whole lot about, but write about things that you would like to know a whole lot about. Because when I started thinking about writing novels, Tom Clancy was really big and hot back then, and all these books and all these movies and military thrillers, and I started thinking about writing military thrillers, and I started writing some of that stuff and researching that genre, but I didn't have a huge interest in it. And I remember when I was trying to become a screenplay writer back in the early 90s, and Michael Crichton had written Jurassic Park. And I remember talking to some of my friends out in LA, and they were like, oh my God, because the worst thing ever happened to us, because every script we're getting has dinosaurs in it. I'm getting, romantic comedy scripts that have a T-Rex blowing down the hallway of the house, because that's people just chasing trends. So I would say, what will lift your prose and your plotting above the sludge piles in New York? It'll be if you have a fascination with the subject matter. It'll lift how you write. It'll lift how you research. It'll lift how you tell a story. I look at a person, Laura Hillenbrand, who wrote Seabiscuit and a number of other nonfiction books. Yes, and she's has a chronic disease, so she really can't get out of her house. But she fell in love with the subject matter of horse racing and horse breeding and Seabiscuit, and she spent many, many years just diving down into that with this passion. And when you read that book, you felt the passion in the pages. So I wish I told myself that, don't chase trends. Don't try to think about what's hot, because the time you finish your book, it won't be hot anymore. Right. You need passion when you write. So find something you're passionate about.
So I want to get to Walk the Wire now. It's a 6-book in the Amos Decker series, the Memory Man series. And I was wondering, I'm always curious about where the story for a book starts. Because for me, it's often like one scene or one image or one scenario. Do you remember what your first image was for Walk the Wire?
It was the plains of North Dakota and a body lying in the dirt. And a hunter thinking he's looking for a wolf and is staring at this pile on the ground and realizing it's human. That kind of set the story for me. Although I have to tell you that, ordinarily it's not the same with every book what the actual catalyst for it is. For Walk the Wire, I read an article about this military facility on the eastern side of North Dakota. It was the Eye in the Sky they built in the 60s to watch out for missiles coming from Russia. And it's still in existence today, and they're sort of air traffic control for space debris and stuff. And then I read about this religious sect, the Hutterites. They were based in Germany. They lived by the scripture of communal living, that the military sold off like 500 acres right around this Eye in the Sky super secret facility to these farmers. So you got people plowing fields next to this Eye in the Sky. And I thought, my God, I could build a story out of that, because that's just two cool things sitting right next to each other. And I've been really interested in fracking, just from sort of a political economic point of view. And the western side of North Dakota is dominated by fracking. And so, being the god that you are when you're a novelist, I just picked up the super secret facility and the farmers and the Hutterites, and I plopped them in western North Dakota where the oil region is, and wrote a story about that. But there was reading that article about the religious sect and the Air Force, it really prompted me to think about this.
And excuse me, you open Amos up a bit more to readers in this one. There's more personal backstory. And why do you think you were ready for that? Was it time to just turn over a new card and you felt like it was time?
It's always a tricky balance with characters, series characters like that. And you know this, it's like how much to tell and how much to withhold. And when I was writing the King and Maxwell series, like the third book, I would get back then letters and then later emails, mostly from women who said, look, when are they going to sleep together? just do it, pull the trigger on that, just let it have it. But that's a tricky balance, because once you do that Pandora's box, you can never put it back in, and then maybe a little bit of the magic is gone.
Right.
So with Decker, you want to keep the magic alive as much as possible, and if you pull the curtain aside too far and too often, the mystique goes away. But I thought with this sixth book, and I'd set this up a little bit up in the last Amos Decker book, that it was time for readers to get a glimpse more into his background again. And it was an instinctual feel for me as the writer of 6 novels with this guy now, where I just felt like it was time.
Yeah.
There was no pattern or formula or timeline that I had in my head, but as I'm sitting there writing, I'm thinking, if I were a reader not connected to this guy as the writer, what else would I want to know about him?
Right.
And is this the time?
Right. So one thing that I think is so cool with this character is he has synesthesia. So he replaces emotion with colors, and you manage to kind of provide a different perspective on emotion, because you take us in from the side with that. And the same with the hyperthymesia. It's so interesting looking at it from the craft perspective that you come up with and round this character out, and then it lets you kind of discuss and get access to characters and emotions and a feeling state that's very different than usual. I'd imagine that wasn't something that was premeditated. I'd imagine that you just thought of this character, you thought of the skill set, and then as you got into, like, once you roll up your sleeves and get your hands in the clay, you started to realize all these ways that you can talk about emotion in different terms and start to play with it more. Is that the order of how that went?
One reason why, I couldn't outline Amos Decker. I needed to spend time with him on the page. He's not the sort of guy that you can just outline 1B, 2B, 3B. I needed to walk with him in the streets. I needed to hold his hand. I needed to see him under pressure. Mm-hmm. And that's how I built the character out. He was such a unique person, but any character in any book that has any great depth to them, I think you sort of have to do the same thing, spend time with them.
Right. So
it's like meeting someone new.
That's right. And there's a special appearance of another Baldacci favorite in this, who I don't want to name because I don't want to have a spoiler alert here. But when you bring in different characters, and you've written more series than I think almost anyone, are there different worlds that you have to bring into alignment, or in your head, are they all in different geographical points in the same world?
They're all out there on a certain line. But it doesn't mean that those lines are meant to cross. So when I thought about what I was here's where this came from. I was thinking about what I was asking Amos Decker and Alex Jamieson to do in this novel, and what forces would be arrayed against them. And my thinking at one certain point was, I'm going to lose, the element of plausibility if I'm going to have him and her single-handedly, just 2 FBI agents alone in North Dakota, take out this force. It's just going to strain, plausibility, and I'm going to end up with egg on my face. People, I'm going to get, thousands of emails with people that say, "Oh my God, that's nuts." So then I thought about, allies, partners. What else could I do to help them? And then the characters that we're talking about came to mind, because plausibly I could build scenarios where the underlying plot, it would dovetail very nicely into deploying these characters into this. They would be interested in this. The people they work for would be interested in what was going on in North Dakota, and they could partner with Decker. So it really came from knowing that Decker and Jamieson had some sort of plot deficiencies because of what I was asking of them. And if they had done it alone, I don't think it would have worked from a story point of view.
Great. All right. So let's do some rapid fire, 1-word answer, question and answer. All right. What's your desert island book?
Treasure Island.
Beatles or Stones? What was it? Sorry. Okay. Ross or John D?
Ross. Yeah.
Football or baseball?
2 years ago, it would have been football. Today, it's baseball.
Batman or Superman? Chandler or Hammett? Summer or Winter Olympics? What is the worst part of writing for you?
Stumbling is the worst part of writing for me.
What's the best?
The The best is nailing that line.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just nailing that line to perfection. That's the best.
Who would you least like to be stuck in an elevator with?
The guy who used to own the plaza.
Do you think, when you think about it, do you want to write until you die, or does retirement at some point sound appealing? Are you one of those guys who wants to be like, mid paragraph, like Robert B. Parker, at his desk?
Yeah. Danielle Steele said she wants to die slumped over her computer. I don't see retirement, for me. I'm just going to keep writing unless something occurs that I can't write anymore. It's an inseparable part of me.
Favorite TV show of all time?
I'm going to go really stupid, and because one when I was a kid, the Wild Wild West. Not the greatest show of all time, but as a kid, I loved it.
Which writer, living or dead, do you most envy?
Mark Twain.
If you couldn't live in Virginia, where would you live?
If I couldn't live in Virginia, I'd live in England.
London or the Cotswolds, or?
I live in London. Yeah.
Okay. So, I want to do the Proust questionnaire, and this is with a hat tip to Vanity Fair. Marcel Proust and David Baldacci, like, which is a better pairing than this? So with a nod to Vanity Fair and to Mr. Proust, here are a few questions. What is your current state of mind?
Anxious.
What is your idea of perfect happiness?
Family.
Who?
And dogs.
What kind of dogs do you have?
2 Labradoodles. Yeah. Love dogs. I've always had dogs.
Yeah, we just got a 3rd Ridgeback 4 days ago, which is a good thing to have during quarantine.
Yes.
What is the quality you most like in a man?
Humility.
What is the quality you most like in a woman?
Humility.
What do you value most in your friends?
Candor.
What is the trait you most deplore in yourself?
Impulsiveness.
What is the trait you most deplore in others?
Dishonesty.
Which living person do you most admire?
At this moment in time, Anthony Fauci.
Okay. When and where were you happiest?
I was happiest after I met my wife. That was the happiest I've been by far.
On what occasion do you lie?
When some of my dearest friends or family ask me what I think of an idea that they have.
Friends and family be warned.
Yes.
What is your greatest fear?
Being out of control of something, not able to control something.
What's your greatest regret?
Not being there for some family members when I wanted to be or could have been. Yeah.
If you could change one thing about yourself, what would it be?
That I could relax more easily than I'm able to.
Which historical figure do you most identify with?
this, and don't hold this against me, but one that I admire greatly for a lot of different reasons, and one that I wish I could sort of hold to that standard, with all of his faults, would be Winston Churchill.
Mm. I always think
man of the moment.
Yeah. Churchill, Mark Twain, and Oscar Wilde, I think, said more things that are memorable and witty. Like, you can get down to the 900th thing that they said, and it's better than most everyone else. I'd say a close fourth would be Dorothy Parker in that bunch.
Yes.
Yeah, Churchill's unparalleled almost. What is your favorite journey?
I like taking journeys. I'm very nostalgic in my thinking sometimes. I like taking journeys back into the past. My family's past, my own personal history. I like going back to places that I've been before but haven't been for a long time, to see, what time has done to them.
What do you consider the most overrated virtue?
Thrift.
Which words or phrases do you most overuse?
So I find that I use that way too much. And then if I could strike them from all future writings, I would.
What talent would you most like to have?
I would like to be musical. I would like to be able to play music. Yeah.
What do you consider your greatest achievement?
It's a cliche, but my kids, because they'll outlive me, and they'll embody what we try to teach them. But it's the same thing. It's my greatest achievement and what I'm the proudest of.
Mm-hmm. What's your most treasured possession?
I have the key to the front door of the Mark Twain house in Hartford, and with an open invitation to go there anytime I want to write. So I would say that's probably my most treasured possession.
That's a good answer. What is your most marked characteristic?
Loyalty.
How would you like to die?
In my sleep.
If you could choose what to come back as, what would it be?
A dog.
Your dog, probably.
Yeah, my dog.
What is your motto?
Never give up. That's the underdog's motto, because look, as writers, we all know that. We live by that.
Mm-hmm. So, couple questions. I want to zigzag us back into writing now. Is there any other medium you're eager to tackle? You've done, YA. You've done. You wrote some screenplays. You obviously have 41 is the adult novels. I wish there was a better name for adult novels so it doesn't sound so porny, but we're stuck with that. Is there anything else you want to play with? A graphic novel, an Atlee Pine musical?
I think if in the grand scheme of things, if I could tackle a nonfiction subject matter, I would. I was a history minor in college. I eat, live, breathe history. I love reading every type of book about what came before, because we learn valuable lessons that way. And I like research, and I like getting into the lives of others. So I create the lives now. I wouldn't mind getting into the life of someone who actually existed, and write about them.
So one of the things that's interesting for me with, prominent writers who have a measure of commercial success, you can always tell when a writer is getting tired and they start phoning it in, when they're slightly bored because the reads become slightly boring. But 41 books in, there's still this energy to your writing and this propulsiveness. What do you do to find that freshness that you still bring to the page?
I think I keep trying to challenge myself to do different things. And I think one reason I have so many series going is because I'm terrified of getting complacent. I'm terrified of getting bored with my own characters. So reaching out, into the fantasy, that got me out of my comfort zone, scared the living crap out of me because I'd never attempted anything like that before. Didn't know if I could do it, but fear is a great antidote to complacency. Mm-hmm. So if you ask yourself the question when you're starting to write a new book, how did I do it before? That's a really, really bad question to ask, and even worse answer. Ask yourself, how can I do it differently? So what I try to do is I try to branch into so many different directions that there's no way in the world I could ever become bored with any of them.
Do you have any routines, like habit setting routines that you have to get ready for writing, like what baseball players do before they step into the box? Like what's the pregame routine?
Yeah, I will always go back and read the first chapter of whatever I'm writing and the 2 chapters that I'd written, or the chapter that I'd written the previous day, to get me back into the flow and the sensibility of the story, and just kind of, that sets my meter going again. And it allows me to sort of see where I want to go. But it's almost like warming up. You want to warm it before you throw the first pitch.
Yeah, it's a running start.
Yeah.
So last question here. What are you looking forward to the most? And this can be in writing, this can be in anything. Is there something that's out there creatively or otherwise that you're anticipating most eagerly?
Yeah, I'm hoping that after this pandemic is over, that in a broad picture, that we sort of reprioritize as a country what we want to be as a population, as a human being, as a society. I want people to come out of this. If they started reading books again while they were cooped up in their homes, I hope they continue to read lots more books because it'll make them better people. I feel like maybe this is, I don't know if it's Mother Nature's way of telling us, although pollution's gone way down. If you can see the bottom of the canals in Venice, hey, people, listen, wake up. That's a great thing. You stopped polluting and look what happened. Nature can regenerate itself. That maybe we come out of this better and stronger, more humanitarian, and not so much anger and divisiveness. That is kind of what I obsess over right now. I know I'm not the only one, but I hope we come out of this just better.
Excellent. Well, David, it's always a pleasure talking to you. I always love seeing you. I think there's some questions that we have from readers. Is that right?
That is correct. I have a few questions. The first one is, it comes from someone who says, I haven't read any of your novels, but I find myself with a lot of time and I'd like to start. Which of your novels would you recommend I start with?
I'll give the person 2. They can start with a non-series, The Winner, and the other one would be Memory Man.
And Greg, if you were giving this reader that advice, which of David's novels would you recommend?
Memory Man.
Great.
Well, or The First Atlee Pine. That's a hell of a book too.
Do you revisit your books after the fact? Do you ever think about going back and what you might do differently with a book?
I do, because we're apprentices for life at this craft. We're never going to master it. I go back to old books for 2 reasons. One, just for consistency. When you're on a film set, you have a scriptee, and that person is supposed to make sure that everything is consistent. The hair looks the same, the hats, the costumes, whatever. But so for me, if you're writing a series, and Greg knows this too, that I remember lots of details in my books, but lots is not good enough. You have to, make sure that everything is consistent. So going back to make sure that what you wrote back in book 1 and you're on book 6 now is consistent. But I also go back and look at passages that I've written. If I think they're, 1, not good, and so I know that you don't want to do that again. You need to improve. You need to get better. Or 2, a passage that I really thought was good that was sort of bolster me that, take it to a higher level in this book. Look what you did in that book. That was 3 levels over what you're cranking out over here. You got to do better. You got to be better. You're capable of this. So it's almost like a little rah booster for me as well.
Another question, has the process over all these books and over all these years changed at all? Or do you approach writing from start to finish in relatively the same way?
You change all the time as a writer. I mean, you have to. You could have the same processes throughout the way, but you're always going to change a little bit of how you do it. Just because you're always growing and evolving as a writer, at least you should be. And you learn from past mistakes, you move on, you change what you're doing. And also, as a writer, you may just get tired of one process and you want to try something new. And guess what? There's no rule that says you can't do that. And that actually might make you a better writer to get out of what might have become a rut for you. The process is a funny thing. You know, most people think of a process. If you're at a factory and you're working at a factory, process is really important because they want the product to come out to look exactly like the next product and the next product and the next product. They want no originality. They want consistency. That's not so good if you're a writer. You want the product to look different every time out. You want people, you want people to read the book and say, yeah, this is a great Gregg Hurwitz book. I see all the great things. It's all of his books are a Baldacci book. But at the same time, you want to go above that. You want to go beyond that. And it also starts with the process.
Next question is, I'm combining two questions. One is, do you take an active role in the adaptation of your books into movies for film or television? And then the second part is sort of related to that, is do you do any collaborative writing for screenplays, or are you a solitary writer?
The first one is I've adapted one of my books for feature film. The other ones, you know, I'll look at scripts and give comment, and you know, they can listen to my input or not. But here's my litmus test, and I will throw this out there for any writer who's thinking about having their work adapted or selling their work. And this rule has worked incredibly well for me over the years. I never want to have so much control over a film project such that if it fails, they can blame me, and they will. So for the most part, I just give my input, you know, give my opinion, and they can follow it or not. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then I'm not holding the buck. So that has worked really well for me. Collaboration-wise, I'll just say this, that for a writer, I do not play well with others. I like to be in control and in charge of everything. I'm sure it's fun to work with somebody else on projects and stuff, but writing is a very personal, intimate thing for me. And, you know, trading off ideas, and you write a chapter, I write a chapter, it just doesn't have a lot of appeal for me.
And our final question, do novels or writers as artists have a role through their work on commentary on social issues, or are they just there to entertain?
My God, I mean, the writers and novels have changed the world. So I would say, you know, yes, I'm not saying you have an obligation or responsibility in every book to do that, but most writers are aware of what's going on in the world. They think deeply about issues. They spend a lot of time in isolation, sort of in their own heads. I don't know one writer out there that's not thinking about a lot of the same issues I'm thinking about right now, and what change I'd like to see for that. And that's going to permeate into your book. I'm not saying get on your soapbox for 300 pages, because nobody wants to read that, but you can devise stories such that your points of view and opinions on things at least can be out there for people to pick up if they want to, and to think about if they want to. You don't want to beat them over the head with it, but it's an important thing, you know. I always look back to you know, Uncle Tom's Cabin, when Abraham Lincoln had the, you know, good fortune to meet her, and said, so you're the little woman that started this big war. I have no idea if it's actually happened, if that's apocryphal or not, but books can, and will continue to change the world.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. That was a delightful conversation. A reminder to our viewers, David's new book is Walk the Wire, and it's available wherever books are sold. And we encourage you to support the authors we feature and independent bookstores by buying their books at bookshop.org. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.